everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my channel. I have been accepted to participate in the Scroop Patterns and Virgil's Fine Goods pattern test for a new pattern that has just come out, and it's called the Amalia Jacket. So it's kind of caraco-ish, and so I can finally make the thing that's been on my list to make out of that IKEA bedspread fabric that has been on my list for like 2 years. So I'm super excited that I've been allowed to participate in this. I have not sewn any 18th century since like 2014, I think, so it's been a little while, and so getting back into the swing of things here is a little challenging. So I have my stays on. These I actually won from Designs from Time, which was so exciting. So I haven't really gotten to wear these for anything yet because I actually just got them in December or January of several months ago. And so I have these on, and I also have my mock-up on. Now this is mock-up 1.2, I guess. I didn't film the first one at all because it felt really way off. Now it turns out I don't think it was actually that way off. So I am kind of between sizes on the sizing chart. You're supposed to go by bust, and I have just shy of a size 48 bust in my stays. It's 47.5. And then my waist though is actually between a size 44 and 46, so it's significantly smaller, but you're supposed to go by bust. So I decided I would cut the bust size and then I would take in the waist once I tried it on and knew what had to be done. I also, by the way, lengthened this pattern. So all of the body pattern pieces I lengthened by 1 inch where it says to lengthen the patterns, and then the straps I lengthened by ½ an inch, which should have done more because that's one of the fit issues that I'm having right now. So fitting wise, what I did after I first tried it on was I wound up taking in these side front seams. So I actually took in 1 inch on each side at the waist, and then I tapered out so that it was taking in a ½ inch on each side by the time it got to the bust. And I probably could have gone with like 3/8 of an inch. It feels maybe a tiny bit tight up at the bust now, but I think it's pretty darn good. And doing that actually fixed a lot of the other issues that I was having with the fit of my first mock-up. So for example, my neckline felt really high at first, and I think it's because it wasn't staying down in place where it needed to be to hit my waist. And so like I made all these notes over here about where I should draw the neckline down to, and now I'm like, I think I don't need to do that. I think it's kind of fine as is. So I'm gonna cut out mock-up number 2 and then determine if I want that. I do need to do some tweaking to the pattern pieces still, and particularly the straps. So right now the back is hitting me right where I want the back to hit me, meaning that I need to add more seam allowance to it because it's where I want it to end. And I think that's mostly just because my stays are pretty high in the back and I need it to cover my stays, or at least I want it to cover my stays. So I will need to raise the back of the pattern just a little bit. I'm also needing to angle the straps a little bit. Now that's part of the pattern. They do say that you have to angle the straps to fit you, so totally, fine, whatever, but I also have to lengthen the straps. As I mentioned, I only lengthened them by ½ an inch, and I need a lot more. You can see where it's like not even connecting over here at the front. The back, I have taken out most of the seam allowance where the straps are connecting. Right now I think it's about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance and 3/8 of an inch seam allowance on the inside, because as you might be able to tell, it's kind of gapping there. It needs to actually get a little tighter there, but it needs to have a 5/8 inch seam allowance is what it's supposed to be. And this obviously needs to be longer because it's not even touching at the sides, and it's only overlapping by about ½ inch total right here. So the only other thing I think that I am doing here is that I also need to lengthen the front point. Again, this is hitting me exactly where I want it to hit, and I need to add the seam allowance. So right here at the waist, it's great. My seam allowance is actually folded up and it's hitting me perfectly. So I just need to give a little bit of extra length as it comes around to the point. So I am going to cut a full second mock-up. Luckily I've got bed sheets galore, so I can cut some mock-ups out of that. But I'm super excited to be getting back into the 18th century, and I'm really loving this pattern so far. So yeah, thank you, Scroop Patterns and Virgil's Fine Goods. Alright, so I have mock-up number 2 on now of the bodice, and for some reason this seems a little bit wrinkly, and I'm not sure why that is. I don't know if it's maybe somehow larger, even though it shouldn't be, because I cut the same size around patterns, but if so, that's an easy fix. I can always just close this a little bit tighter or what have you. And I think that I have fixed all of my fit issues now. The straps are fitting really, really great. The back is high enough that even with the seam allowance folded down like it is right now, it covers my stays. It's getting a really nice shape down here, hitting right at my natural waist. I folded in, by the way, all of the seam allowances except for around the arm's eye because that's too difficult to fold in, but everything else is folded in, so it's just as it will be. This is the lining though. The exterior of the bodice is actually cut with different pieces, so I will have to figure out how to relate this to those pieces, but hopefully it won't be that bad. But yeah, everything is fitting really great. The only additional thing that I did was that I folded down the kind of the front, starting like about here of the neckline, by only about 3/8 of an inch. So I thought I was going to wind up taking a lot more down from that neckline, but I don't seem to need to. I like it where it is. Right now it's doing this weird wrinkle thing because of the way that I folded it, but otherwise I think it's fitting really great. I mean, everything just seems pretty perfect, like the straps and everything I'm super happy with. And so I think I'm ready now to do a sleeve mock-up. I don't normally mock up a sleeve before I assemble the bodice, but I have heard that there are some things with this where, like, if you put the sleeve on, you get a little wrinkle here, and then you have to, you know, change where the strap hits the bodice to fix that little wrinkle. So I want to try that out, and also this is a pattern test that I'm doing this for, and so we're supposed to mock up the sleeve before diving in and actually making the bodice. So anyway, again, super happy with this. I am going to go and mock up the sleeve now. I do have one question though, for any of you who may be really knowledgeable in the 18th century, particularly people who are plus size, and specifically plus size with like a similar body shape to mine. How do you get your stays to not ride up? I swear, every time I wear stays, and I now have 3 pairs of 18th century stays, every single one of them rides up. And this one, I think I'm feeling it a lot more than others. Like literally the slits on this, now I did not make this one, as I mentioned before, but the slits on this are actually like above my natural waist. So I feel like my natural waist is sitting, I don't know, high because of the stays. I think the bodice is still sitting in the right place, but the slits are literally going higher than the bodice. And so the stays just want to like ride up, and that's what has always happened with the 2 pairs of stays that I've made for myself as well. And it's one of the reasons why I don't like stays, because especially if you're sitting for a while, you get up and you find that your stays are like up around your chin and they've completely left your waist behind. So I don't know if it's a fit issue or what, but please, ladies, how do you get your stays to stop riding up? This sort of thing doesn't happen with Victorian corsetry, and that is why I think I like Victorian corsetry so much. So if you know how to fix my problem, please write me a comment and let me know. That'd be great. So I did my sleeve mock-up, and as you can tell, it's terrible. I don't know what's going on here. I think the pattern needs to be increased here to fit the front of my shoulder because it's just pulling everything off. The arm actually fits pretty fantastically. Like I wouldn't change anything there. I'm not sure if the pleats are right. I feel like they're not. I feel like they want to be spaced out a little bit more, but that's an easy fix. What I probably should do, honestly, is pop open the seam from about here to like here and see where this wants to be versus where the sleeve wants to be, and then increase the sleeve head by that much. Yeah, it's real bad because look how nicely this side is fitting and look how terrible that side looks now. Okay, I'm gonna see if I can fix that. Okay, so I opened the seam, but now I'm actually wondering if it's that the whole sleeve needs to be rotated, because now that it's fitting me right, as in it's not pulling, the seam is like way, I don't know, it just feels so far over from where a seam should go, and I'm not familiar enough with 18th century to know if that is where it should go, but I'm used to seams being like here on Victorian stuff, like a full 1.5 inches over from where this is. So I'm thinking maybe it's that the whole sleeve needs to be rotated around, which maybe would help some of the weirdness going on back here too, because it feels like it wants to pull forward. Maybe I just need to rip it all out and shift the whole thing around forward and see if that fixes this, because look how big of a gap that is. I mean, we're talking like at least 2 inches, I think, that is open. Like the seam is right here and the seam is right here, and that's all empty space. And it's still pulling a little bit right up at the apex of the shoulder, so that's still not quite right, which is what makes me also think that it's needs rotating or something. So I reset the sleeve, moving the sleeve, rotating it I think about an inch forward. Basically, I went and I lined up the back seams instead of the front seams, and that rotated it like about an inch forward. And it's definitely better both in the way that the back plates are hitting and also the way that the front is pulling, but it is still pulling a little bit. So I think that the sleeve head does need to be increased a little bit here, but I don't know enough about 18th century to know if that's for sure. It just seems really like it's pulling right there at the seam again. So it's been a couple days since I last checked in on the 18th century project, the pattern test project, and it's going pretty well. I was having a really hard time translating the changes that I made to the lining pieces into the outer pieces, because they're for the center back and for the side piece. So this piece and this piece, if you can see that, there are 2 outer pieces for each of those inner pieces. And so trying to translate the changes that I made to make sure that the outer pieces would be the same size as my new inner pieces was just like really challenging for me. And so now what I'm actually going to do, I have now done that. I have now cut out everything, but in case I want to use this pattern again, so that I don't have to do that sort of translation over again, I am actually going to go and trace all of the pieces that I've cut out onto pattern paper so that I can have that for later. The other thing I should mention is that I never actually did a second mock-up on the sleeve. I just kind of got sick of doing sleeve mock-ups or doing mock-ups in general. I kind of know what I need to do by increasing the top of that sleeve head right here, and I am going to try that in a second mock-up version after I put together the bulk of the bodice. So I'm excited. I've cut everything out. I forget if I mentioned this, by the way, but the fabric that I'm using is actually an IKEA duvet. So it's this fabric. A lot of people have used this fabric for 18th century stuff, so I think I'm in good company. And I bought it quite some time ago in order to make it into a caraco and ideally a petticoat. And as it turns out, I think, depending on how much fabric the sleeves are going to take up, I think I actually do have enough for a matching petticoat.
I did have enough. You can see that video up above or down below in the description.
This is, by the way, a twin size duvet cover. So it was the duvet cover and a pillowcase. And out of the pillowcase, I think I got a bodice front, a bodice side, back, and I think I will get one sleeve piece. Oh, and I also got the short little bodice piece. There's a short piece right here. So I was able to get all of that out of a twin duvet, which is pretty cool. And again, I think I can get the petticoat out of that as well. So I am going to go trace off my patterns so that I can then put everything together. I'm feeling a little bit like, who even am I? Because I didn't finish my seams on the lining because it didn't tell me to on the pattern, and it's, I think, going to be all within the bodice. And B, I'm actually hand basting things, and I never hand baste things. That's just like not something that I do. I did do all of these seams by machine, not by hand, because I am not that dedicated. I just can't do that. But I did hand baste. I mean, look at my giant basting stitches. I do not do these kind of things. This is crazy. All of the lining pieces are now assembled, and I am ready to assemble the outer pieces / start kind of sewing them to the lining, I think is part of what it is. I'm excited about that. I think this is going to be fun, and I'm enjoying this pattern so far. So I've been working on the bodice a whole bunch today, and yet I I don't feel like I have a ton to show for it. I am so not used to in the 18th century where you have to do like a lot of things by hand and not by machine. Normally, you know, you do together a few seams, maybe some darts and Victorian bodice, you're done, and you can do it all on the machine and it's fine. But this is a lot by hand, so it's taking me forever. So basically, I did the center back seam by machine, and I've been doing the skirt seams both by machine and by hand. I've been doing a mantua maker stitch, but instead of doing the baste initially, I've been doing that part by machine. So what that looks like is first there's a machine stitch that goes in the seam, and then you cut down one side of the seam allowance to 1/4 inch, and then you fold them both the same direction, press them both the same direction, and basically like press the wider seam allowance that's left over that first one so that all the edges are encased, and then you stitch onto the seam that you already sewed, that I, like, for example, already sewed on the machine. So, but this part's by hand. So basically you're felling it to the seam instead of like flat felling it where you are sewing it to like the garment. So you don't see a second line of stitching on the outside, you just see that initial seam. So it's kind of interesting, but it's taking forever. And then these seams are done with prick stitching. And so it's like a back stitch, except with just a tiny bit showing on this side. Like you can see it there on the red, but it's pretty near to invisible on the white. And so far I have done 2 seams on each side using the prick stitch method, and then all of the skirts are already together using that mantua maker seam. So I think that was like 5 seams or something like that with the mantua maker seam. And then there's also a lot of basting, so like all the pleats get basted in all around, like the edges up here have been basted. So, and I'm not even actually doing all of the basting that the pattern calls for because I pinned things, so it had called for a lot of basting here in the center, and I did not do that. I pinned it, and I've been pinning a lot as I go and then kind of replacing it with basting. It's a lot more hand sewing than I'm used to. I think it will look very pretty. I sure hope it fits, because in the 18th century, there's really no way to like fix it if it doesn't fit. Like you've encased all of your seams super a ton, and then they're also done by hand, and so like you never want to undo those. So really hope that my mock-up, which is actually the lining, works well, because geez, that's nerve-wracking. So hopefully tomorrow I will be able to get the fronts on. I do also have this seam that needs to be stitched. Oh, and I started doing the hem, but I haven't finished the hem. I just did the parts in the front. So basically it's done to a little past the curve, and then all of the rest will still need to be hemmed eventually, but the rest of that is the last step. So anyway, that is it for today, and I will be back tomorrow with more. So the bodice is coming along. Basically all of the bodice parts are now done. I think, if I have this correct, that the only parts that need doing now are the hem, part of which I have pressed up, and there's like a few pins in there, but I haven't actually sewn the hem. And then obviously I don't have sleeves, and because I don't have sleeves, I don't have the straps on for the outer piece of the strap, but I think that's it. So I still haven't tested another sleeve mock-up, so that is going to be the next thing that I have to do. Today, what I did was I really focused on like the fronts. This is not fitting Lady Jane because she is not wearing stays. I put the fronts on, obviously, because yesterday we didn't even have fronts. So I think when I last left off, this section was pinned in place. So this has been stitched in place. I did that this morning, and then I started putting the fronts on. So that involved having stitches done here, and then stitches here around the waist, and oh, and stitches on this piece at the waist as well. And then putting the fronts on and doing more stitches, putting the straps of the lining on, but then all of these were sewn, had to be whipped down by hand. So the straps were put on by machine, one of the few machine sewn seams in here, but that should be covered by the outer strap, I'm pretty sure,
because it just said to backstitch. So basically anywhere that the pattern told me to backstitch, I just did it by machine because can't be bothered. But everything else is done by hand. So lots and lots of handwork, all of those prick stitching sections that were on the outside that you can't even see my prick stitches even when I'm super close to it, so I'm kind of happy about that. Oh, and I guess the skirts on the inside, or rather the lining on the inside, had to be whipped down to the skirts. So all those little whip stitches, these are all basting stitches, so those should all wind up coming out, I think. I also have to figure out how/if I'm trimming this. So I kind of was thinking just maybe a kind of a simple cuff on the sleeve. I don't know that I'm going to do anything else to it. The one thing that I'm not sure about is that it closes center front. And I still feel like caracos don't tend to close center front. They tend to close over stomacher. So I'm really not sure about that. But yeah, overall, I'm quite pleased. Hopefully we'll get sleeves on tomorrow, and good night.
So I put the bodice on so that I could start looking at the sleeve fit, but obviously I need to fix things first because there is some really, really wonky stuff going on, and I think it's kind of twofold where the problems lie. One, I think I forgot entirely that I was really waffling over the neckline height earlier on the mock-up and just went with that like slightly lower neckline and ran with it and forgot all about the fact that I wasn't sure if that was the right idea. And I think it's not the right idea. I think it's too tall. Like it's the point where I would want it just kind of for my comfort level, but it can't be there because it does this thing where it just kind of sticks out away from my chest. And it's straight and there's not really anything to do about it, and even like pinching this up isn't really going to solve that neckline issue. It's just going to make wrinkles move, I feel like. So I think I still need to cut this down another like ½ inch maybe. And then the other bit is that my straps are now somehow way too long and also maybe angled wrong, and we're talking like an inch too long, maybe more, like significantly too long. So I think I need to figure out what's going on there and probably move the straps to make them actually fit. And then once I figure that out, then I guess I can move on to the sleeves, but again, not there yet because there's just stuff going on. I think the rest of this is fitting pretty well. Like it seems like it's hitting me at the right place with my waist. Now, with my lining, I did not try it on with the bum pad and the petticoats and stuff. And now, of course, I do have that on because I have the skirts of the bodice on and I needed to try everything on all together. And I maybe should have tried doing that before because, I don't know, I forget that like I tend to get this bend out with the 18th century below the waist. I mean, I get it with any century, but with Victorian and stuff, I feel like the bodices naturally want to go that way. And this is like straight, so it doesn't really bend that way. So I'm not really sure what to do about that. I don't know if that's like, oh, well, I just need to, you know, pin it so that it has less of an overlap at the bottom here and then pin it so that it's more of an overlap at the waist to kind of compensate for that. I'm not really sure. The whole pin front thing, like I know it's kind of adjustable, but it's also just kind of annoying. So yeah, I'm just not sure how to fix that wrinkle, or if it's just that like when I pin it, I need to have it pinned closer together so that this bit is pinned and like this bit is pinned and this bit is pinned so that there are no wrinkles. Because right now I'm getting wrinkles because it's coming in and then going out, and that's just what 18th century stays do for me, because it doesn't like tuck back in like Edwardian or even like some of the Victorians do when they have the little curved belly. So yeah, I'm not really sure what to do with that, but I think that the skirts are sitting pretty nicely. I think that is what I want. The back looks really nice. Because the straps are too long, it's kind of coming away from me. So I don't know if the straps maybe need to get shortened a bit in the back as well, but I think they're pretty spot on. I definitely need to solve the issues with the top of the bodice. I think that's the biggest issue, what's going on there, slash the extra length in the straps. So I'm going to do some playing around, figure out how to solve all of that, and I guess then I can start trying sleeve stuff. I'm going to go figure out what to do with this, and I will come back when I have a sleeve on. So I think I figured out the changes that I need to make. What I've done is I've pinched this up significantly and pinned it in place. I think I have about probably close to an inch pinned out on this side, and it's actually more than an inch pinned out over here. I think it's like 1.25 inches as it gets to the sides over here, just to keep it all nice and smooth and secure. And then I've also tucked down the front of the neckline. I was a little worried I was going too low, but I checked in Costume and Detail and they all seem to be about this low, so I think I am good on that, and it's fitting way better. So it's folded down about 5/8 of an inch or so, maybe even 3/4 of an inch by the time it gets to the center, and then kind of tapers out till where it reaches the new, where the strap joins, because that's actually a little bit farther out, so it's okay that it will get tucked in more basically. And so I think it's like about 3/8 through most of this, and then kind of like 1/2 inch, and gets bigger up to about that 5/8, 3/4. I haven't measured it yet. I've just drawn a pink line on where I will need to fold it down. It's kind of annoying because I already sewed that all by hand, but at least it's not a very long distance, so I'll be able to rip that out and probably cut some excess off, but maybe just like tuck the excess in, I'm not really sure, and make that go away. So that should be relatively easy to do. And then I have the new strap placement, and I think that fixes everything. So that's good. And also pulling in at the waist here was able to kind of smooth the bodice out a little bit for that curve. So it is basically just a little bit more overlap right here at the waist than it is both above and below the waist. So I think that really helped. And I think that will be good fit wise. I don't have time to fit the sleeves tonight, but I also did check where the hem of the skirts are currently sitting, and they're really excellent. So most of my hem is not stitched in yet. I have most of it pressed up, not all of it pressed up, but most of it is pressed and pinned in place. So I will press and pin the rest of that, and then I'll be able to hand sew that before at least I can get back to doing straps and sleeves and all that. So I will check in with you when I next have real substance. So it has been a couple of days since I checked in with progress on the 18th century jacket, but as you might be able to tell, I fixed all the problems. So I wound up taking up the straps pretty significantly. The old seam is still in there. I mean, it's 1 inch out of this part, the inner part, and like probably 1.5 inches out of this part of the arm. And honestly, I think I could go another 1/4 inch. So I might still pinch that in a little bit, and I think it will still be okay with the neckline. I did take down the neckline also, and I have also done my second sleeve mock-up. So all I did was I added 1 inch to the height of this, where this seam is. So basically I started about here-ish, I think, tapered to 1 inch here, and likewise started under the arm and tapered to 1 inch here to get more space here. Now all I've done right now is I've kind of pinned on the sleeve where it felt like it wanted to lay. It's quite a bit wrinkly, so I don't know if I might even want to take some of that in, but I do feel like I have good range of motion, so I'm a little torn. The sleeve is also a little long, which is weird. Now granted, I have added a little bit to the height, but only right here. And the rest of the sleeve is just the pattern as is. So it's very strange because I do have long arms, so it's weird that it's long on me. But even where I have now turned it up to down here, it's still longer than most three-quarter sleeve, I should say, 18th century sleeves that you see. A lot of them are really like just at the elbow. I don't love my arms, so I'm totally fine with it being a little bit longer, and it will also maybe give me some options of playing around with, do I want cuff, do I want ruffles, etc., because I'm honestly not sure how I want to trim this dress yet, and I think it's all going to depend on how much fabric I have left for how I wind up trimming this. So I have just done it to here, so I'm going to cut it 5/8 inches longer than this and probably just not finish the hem yet until I have the whole ensemble together, and then I can figure out how I want it to be. Because I do want to just talk for a moment. I'm really liking how this pattern goes together, but I do have one caveat, which I think is somewhat important depending on how historically accurate you want to be. I have had a hard time figuring out how I want to trim this. I've known for a really long time that I wanted to make a caraco, again, however you pronounce that type of 18th century jacket. And so when this pattern test came along, I thought like, oh, perfect. This is basically what I've been wanting to make. But once I got approved for the pattern test, I delved a little bit more into my research. And please do correct me if I'm wrong, if any of you have examples, but I'm having a really hard time finding samples for view A. And there's really, I think I've found one bodice out there that has the skirts kind of like this, the bodice closed center front, the 3/4 sleeve. It's the only one that looks exactly like this. I have also found one that is this, except it's a long sleeve, and I was really tempted to do that, but all of my inspirations for why I wanted a caraco jacket have 3/4 sleeves and mitts and like various types of different patterns. So I decided to not go that route. But the thing is that all of those ones that are the examples of what inspired me to do this in the first place, they all close over some sort of stomacher. Either there's a few of them that have those weird straps. I think there's one from the V&A. There's several that just have regular stomachers. There's some that have like ribbon lacings over stomachers. They all have like robings or a seam line of some sort here and then stomacher here. And so that is my one issue that I'm having with this pattern. It's not the pattern itself, because again, that's going together great and the instructions are all good and everything. It's just that I don't really know about the historical accuracy of it. And again, like the sleeve is really long for a 3/4 sleeve. It has two options in the pattern, a long sleeve or a 3/4 sleeve, but all the 18th century sleeves I've seen are all like here, not, I think this went down to here. And again, I have long arms, I'm 5'10". So that's my one caveat with this. I totally think you should absolutely buy this pattern because again, this has gone together really nicely. It's been just a really great pattern. I haven't had to do that much fitting stuff. It was really just like the neckline and well, I mean, there's fitting stuff that I have to do for every pattern. So I'm just gonna say with the pattern itself, it was really just the neckline. But yeah, that's my one caveat. So
quick update. I've been told that in the final version of this pattern, the sleeve head height was increased and the sleeve length to the elbow and to the hem were decreased. So 2 great fixes.
Anyway, I'm feeling like I'm in a good place now. I am feeling comfortable enough to cut the sleeve out of the actual fabric. I don't even think I'm gonna make this any narrower because I really do like the range of motion that I have right now. And it wasn't until the later in the 18th century when they got those super fitted sleeves. So since I am going for a little bit earlier here, I'm fine with it being a little baggy and I can always take that out of the actual sleeve once I've cut it and put it together. But by me being able to start on the sleeves and cut all that out, it means that I can examine how much fabric is left, if I have enough for a petticoat, if I have enough for a ruffled petticoat, which is really what I want to do, if I have enough for cuffs, etc. So I'm excited to move forward on the pattern. By the way, I'm wearing one mitt just because I'm testing how it would look with the sleeve. I know this seems weird, but yeah, I'm excited to move forward and get my sleeves on. Hopefully the next time that I see you, I will have sleeves, or at least I'll be working on the sleeves. So have a good night and I'll see you soon. I have a sleeve, kind of. It's pinned in right now, but I think it's pinned in almost correctly. There's like a weird bubble where the plates are, and so I'm just not sure if that is supposed to happen. Sorry, I know this footage is dark. I feel like maybe those pleats actually need to sit a little bit higher on my shoulder as opposed to just like at the seam allowance. So I think I'm going to squidge them up a little bit and hopefully that will fix the bubble that's happening, and or maybe even move them up a little bit farther onto the shoulder, like spread them out a little. So I think I'm gonna try playing with that a bit, but otherwise this sleeve is all assembled. It is sewn into the underarm. It's just not sewn on the top of the arm because the way that you do 18th century sleeves is you attach the bottom kind of like a normal seam, and then the top part, it's supposed to be fitted by someone else, which I don't have someone else helping me. So I'm just doing this by trial and error. And you pull it up over the lining part of the shoulder and then you sandwich the
outer part of the shoulder over it and hand stitch that in place.
So it is literally almost 3 weeks later than the last time that I just filmed and checked in with you. And that's because this basically just wound up in the naughty pile while I reorganized my sewing room and did a couple of smaller projects. I did at some point during all of that go and undo the like back sleeve seam and restitch that by hand, taking out I think about an inch or so as I tapered up. So I went down to where it fit, like around here, and then by the time it got to the top I had taken out I think an inch of the sleeve, and I'm not sure it's enough. I put it on just now and I didn't even bother like pinning all the way up because I was just really looking at the sleeve, and it's still like, what is with the weird bubbly thing? I don't know what's going on because I feel like it's just weirdly on the back of my arm. Look, it goes down almost all the way to the elbow, and it's almost like it needs to be set more forward. So maybe I have the whole thing on crooked. I'm not sure. I never undid the underarm where it's stitched in. I only undid the top, and so like the pleats and stuff are pinned right now. And obviously I undid the area with the seam so that I could redo the seam, but it's just still seems wrong. And I know I have movement, but even with the movement, the wrinkle just stays there. So I don't know if it's still too big, which would suck because I had to undo and redo that by hand because of the way the sleeve's constructed. So I couldn't get into that sleeve seam other than just doing it by hand, which was really annoying. But it's still not right. So I think I'm gonna try first moving the pleats a little bit forward and seeing if that helps, and if not, maybe it needs to rotate fully, though I feel like it's hitting pretty right on the inner arm, but maybe it's still just freaking too big, which is really frustrating, and I just want this done because I started this a really long time ago and sleeves shouldn't be this hard, thanks 18th century. It's also harder because I'm setting them myself, and in the 18th century they didn't set sleeves themselves. So that was part of the delay, to see if I would get a buddy to help me, but you know, coronavirus. Okay, I'm gonna try and fix some things. So I think I figured out the best pleating arrangement, and that did not involve me going in and having to resew the sleeve. What I did do first was I decided to go in and undo some of my basting on the top of the sleeve head so that I could get to the inside of that seam, because all of the raw edges are tucked inside. And by the way, I top stitched it when I redid it. When I hand sewed it, I top stitched it so that I wouldn't have to get to the inside. But that basically just meant that I had a whole bunch of seam allowance, an inch extra seam allowance, sitting inside that sleeve creating bulk. So I think that's what part of the problem was before. So I went in and undid some of that basting and cut off that excess. So now it's back to a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then I repleated things on the sleeve head. So for one thing, it wasn't just repleating. I actually pulled the sleeve head way up past where the seam allowance like should meet. So I don't know how far exactly, because I just kind of kept pulling until most of the wrinkles went away. But I think it's at least a good 1/2 inch set up and in the back as opposed to what it was before, and I think it's really helped. And then I did replete it as well. My pleats are spaced much farther apart now, with the top one farther up the shoulder and the bottom one farther down the shoulder, and then the other one in the middle, and they're smaller pleats. Before I had 2 pleats that were larger, were both kind of in the same area, so now I've spaced them out. I don't know how well you can see it at all on this patterned fabric, but that is what I did. It still does have a little bit of like poof, but I'm able to reach and not have anything pull, and I think that's what I want in 18th century stuff, so that is what I went with. So now I just have to figure out exactly how I did that and do it with the other one. And the other thing that I have to figure out is that where my sleeve now is pulled up and over like the underlayer, it's not just on the lining of the strap, it's also on the back of the armscye, like on the back, somewhere back here. So I had to undo it farther down, rip out some of that stitching so that I could pull it up farther. And so I have to figure out, like, does that mean, because normally you would sandwich the top of the sleeve head underneath the lining and then the outer piece that is the strap. But since this isn't where the strap is, I'm not sure what that means. So I'm gonna have to figure that out. And if all else fails, I am just gonna do this the modern way because I'm sick of the 18th century. Working on this project, I understand why I haven't worked on the 18th century in so long. I don't like wearing the stays. I think they're completely uncomfortable compared to a Victorian corset or Edwardian or like anything Regency on. I think stays, like obviously they learned their technology because stays suck, in my opinion. And the bodices are constructed really weirdly compared to Victorian bodices, and they fit really weirdly compared to Victorian bodices, and like they're super low cut, so you have to do the fichu thing, and it just feels like you're popping out all over, and yeah. Do you ever have a thing where a project is getting so frustrated that you're getting nauseous, and you know that you should stop working on it, but you also know that if you stop working on it now, you won't pick it up again? Because that's where I'm at. So I decided to just do the modern sleeve method and like turn the seam allowance into the inside for the whole top. And I did that, and not only is it super crazy poofy in the back again, but it also feels like it's pulling from here again, and it's just making me feel like I have done the entire sleeve wrong in every way. So that's where I'm at. I'm going to take it off for now, probably undo that seam, and I may or may not continue working on this ever. Okay, it's been just a little bit of time. I did keep working at it, and I am feeling much better. I unpicked the entire sleeve where it was set in and decided to just start over. Somehow in doing all of my mock-ups and everything, my seams I think got way off from where they were supposed to be with setting in the sleeve. So I just kind of went back to the instructions, and although I don't have any of the notches left in here, or if I do, they've mixed in with other markings at this point and I don't know what's what, and I altered my patterns enough that just holding up the patterns isn't gonna do anything. Like I can't just find the notches on the pattern and see where they relate to because I've altered those patterns and I don't remember in what ways because this project is taking forever. Anyway, so basically what I did was the instructions, the one key thing that was currently in my test version of the instructions, and I think that this may have changed by the time they released the actual version, but the one key thing said that the back sleeve seam is placed 1/8 inch below the shoulder strap seam in the back. So using that information, I set the entire rest of the sleeve, and it's so much better. Like, look at that. It's so much better. Basically, before I think I was trying to match up the front seam as opposed to the back seam, and by matching up the back seam, I don't actually know where the front seam is. It's pretty significantly down from where the seam, the shoulder seam is. The front seam is hitting me right here, and then the shoulder seam is right here. So it's pretty significant, and that has really helped, I think, the whole fit of the sleeve. In the back here, I was able to get all of my pleats on the shoulder strap section so that I can set it the 18th century method. And the underarm is again just sewn on by machine because I don't want to take the time to backstitch that. Like it just doesn't make sense to me to backstitch things when I could just use the machine. So that is done by the machine, but since the strap is set in with visible stitches, I want to do that the 18th century method if at all possible. So now I can, because the pleats again are on the strap area. I actually wound up having, I think there's 5 pleats that go from the very top of the shoulder to the bottom of the strap, so they're really spaced out and they're quite small. And I think that that is helping to set the sleeve in much smoother. I don't get that weird gappage, I don't get the wrinkles under the arm. I still have movement, it's not pulling over here, so oh my gosh, so much better. So now I just have to figure out what I did with this sleeve and copy the exact same thing over here. And at that point, I can then sew in the stuff. I mean, I guess I could sew this part in right now and I will actually have a bodice, and that will be so nice because this project, well, I mean, when I say it's taken so much longer than I anticipated, it's because I just couldn't with this project for like 3 weeks, and that's why it's taken a long time. It's not the project itself. Really, I think that I finished this in mostly, what, like a couple weeks or something? But yeah, the procrastination is real when you're feeling overwhelmed. So hopefully I can get the other sleeve in correctly and right the first time, and then I can have a bodice. Wah, wah. Apparently, since I wasn't sure if the first sleeve would fit with that hand sewn seam and everything, I never actually sewed the second sleeve seam. So that's great. A little bit more that I have to do, which means it's not going to happen tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and get out of my stays and hand stitch this sleeve seam and then set it in. And I guess maybe I will be back tomorrow. So I seamed up by hand that second sleeve, and then I realized that the pattern instructions actually just call for back stitching on here first and then putting the strap on. So I just decided, since, you know, I don't believe in back stitching where it's not showing, to go ahead and stitch this down by machine. So I have now stitched down both sides. This is actually the second sleeve here because I forgot to show you this on the first one. The first one, I have already gone and pinned the whole strap in place. I hope that it's laying right. It kind of feels a little bit bubbly, so I hope that it's gonna work, but it is ready to be prick stitched by hand all along the sides of that strap. And I'm going to do the same thing with the other one, pin it down and sew that in place. And that is it. That's the last step that I have to do on here. So I guess I should say that it's the last step that I have to do on here, but I haven't added any decoration at all. Now I have almost zero fabric left, but I do kind of hope that I can maybe make a cuff, because I feel like with this being kind of an earlier look, I would like to make a cuff. Oh yeah, I forgot there is one other thing I have to do. I haven't hemmed it yet. I pinned it in place, so yeah, I guess I do have to do that. We're getting close. I'm feeling a lot better about this, and I just want it to be done. Well, I gave myself a limit of working until 2 a.m. today because it is Saturday, so I could stay up late, and I did not quite finish the hand sewing. This one is totally finished. You can see all those tiny little prick stitches, which I am quite happy with how neat and tiny all those little prick stitches are. This one is not quite finished, so I have, I think, 3 sides of it, or 2.5 sides of it done. I got to there, and then it hit 2 a.m., so I'm just doing this little wrap up, and I will finish that tomorrow. I did do one of the sleeves, but this sleeve still needs its hem done, and hopefully I can get those done first thing tomorrow and then put it on and take some pictures. I'm not sure how I'm going to style it yet either, because the other thing is that I really need more 18th century accessories. I don't even know where my fichu is, so I'm gonna have to kind of cobble together things and make something work, I guess, for tomorrow, because I do really want to take pictures while there is not rain coming from the sky. So I decided that I really do want to add cuffs to these sleeves, but this is the extent of my remaining fabric of all of my fabric. So as you can see, there's really not enough fabric here to just like fold over and have the same fabric on the inside of the cuff. I'm going to have a different fabric as the lining, but I think that's okay. This strip, I believe, is already squared off, so that will help me. It's actually a little bit longer than I need. I thought at first it wasn't going to be enough, but it is just a little bit longer, not by much, but by like maybe 5+ inches. So I am going to back this with just muslin, I think, and then there will be little pleats in the inner elbow, and I'm not really sure how these cuffs are attached. I just couldn't find that information anywhere in my like 20-minute search online last night. So I am going to be winging it, which is ironic considering these are called winged cuffs. So I wanted to talk about the turning of the cuff because it was actually really confusing to me. I don't know why my brain wasn't working this morning. So what I wound up doing was I did long side, and then I did just
the outer side. So I turned the tube right side out and did just the outer side, right sides together. I did that on the machine. This I'm going to slip stitch by hand. So I just kind of folded in the seam allowances and I will just stitch that up by hand because right now that is how I got in there to do that seam by machine. So that was really confusing and it took way longer than it should have and involved a lot of seam ripping because I tried it like 3 times the wrong way. So I'm running out of time to take pictures today because sunlight is going to be fading. That inner stitch is done on both cuffs and I've pleated this one in place and pinned it to the inside seam of the cuff. And now comes the question, I have no freaking idea how to attach this. So, and I have like 10 minutes left before I need to get my makeup and hair started to try to take these pictures. I'm really tempted to just pin this in place for the pictures. Like, I think I'll stitch this seam down and then pin them and then figure out how to do it more later. So I just got back from taking all the pictures and then taking a walk with Lion, and I wanted to share my final thoughts on this project. So putting it on, I was very frustrated again because it still doesn't fit around the neckline. There are gaps, which, you know, luckily fichus exist, but I'm going to show you the gaps here and show you why I'm just like annoyed at myself. I don't know that it's a pattern issue. I think it's a self issue, but as you can see, I have actually pinned it here. This is where the straps connect. I've pinned it on both sides. This one has an entire inch taken out of the neckline. This one's probably more like 3/4 of an inch, but I mean, I just kind of pinned what I could. So that was really, really disappointing, putting this on and finding the neckline to still be super gappy. Basically, before I did this tuck, the sleeves were both like coming off my shoulders, but also the straps were sticking up above my shoulders. And then like the neckline was super, super gappy too. So I have to figure out how to fix this, which probably isn't that hard, but it's all hand sewing, and so it's just like frustrating that I have to redo that. Luckily for now, fichus work. Of course, that said, the fichu that I was wearing with this, I love the color, but it's not a fichu at all. It is some sort of a vintage scarf with some sort of a signature Jim Renoir. I don't know what that is, but I got it from some like vintage sale, and it's got little belt buckles on it, so that's kind of funny, but the rest of it looks really pretty. I need a better fichu, but I can't even find my white fichu, so who knows. The cuffs are pinned on. This one I think actually lost a pin. I felt something pop and it is definitely loose now. So I think that all I have to do is stitch on from the inside
on the edge of the sleeve to the cuff and like do a little whip stitch, not catching the outer layer, just catching the liner layer. This one is still attached via pin, and I mean, I'm very happy with how they look. They're exactly how I wanted them to look. I do want the little bit of ruffle in there too, so that is something that I'll probably add. But I should add that neither of those sort of additions are part of the pattern. Speaking of the pattern, going back to the pattern, I guess the real question is, do I recommend this pattern? And my answer is yes. Like, yes, I have had fit issues, but I also took so long to do this pattern that I don't even remember what I changed. I know that I made the straps longer, and I guess that was probably a problem because I probably didn't need them to be as long as I did. So, but overall, it was a very good pattern. The instructions are really straightforward, and I enjoyed being able to be a part of this pattern test. The pattern has now been released, so I will link to all of the information down below on where you can go buy the Amalia Jacket pattern from Scroop Patterns / Virgil's Fine Goods, because it is a pretty darn good pattern.
Just to interrupt with a quick update, I wanted to show a few more things that I did to it after I wore it. For one, I bound the arm's eye. I just whip stitched it, but I whipped the fabric over so it looks like slightly nicer on the edge. I also fixed the straps. So hopefully they now fit. I haven't tried it on, but I took an inch out in the length here, leaving the arm's eye the same. So just tapered it and had to tuck in a little bit of the neckline too to make that meet the strap because I didn't have any extra fabric there. And I also attached the cuff. So what I decided to do was just kind of sew it where it was pinned. So it is whipped down right here at the top of or bottom of the sleeve to the lining portion of the cuff, but the back is not attached. So you can actually see through it, but it still hangs up quite nicely. And there is the cuff, and that's done. Back to past Rebecca.
Overall, I mean, I'm glad that I finally have another 18th century outfit. It has been way too long since I've done 18th century. That is it for this project. So I do hope that you enjoyed this video. If you liked this video, please go ahead and click the thumbs up icon. And if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, please go ahead and click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified every time I post a video. I do post videos here on YouTube twice a week with my sewing vlogs like this out on Tuesdays and my regular content out on Saturdays. But I post every day to my Instagram, so please go follow me on Instagram. That's at Lady Rebecca Fashions. And if you'd like to support me and all of the work that I do on this channel, I do have a link to my Ko-fi account down below. Once again, thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Happy sewing!